We are here today to talk to you about doing continuous delivery, but it's kind of a journey about how we moved from one state of continuous delivery to another state of continuous delivery. So it's like we were doing continuous delivery and then something happened. So we're going to start off with defining what continuous delivery means to us. In the context of these stories that we're going to tell you. Then we're going to tell you 3 different stories about our journey to CD, and then we're going to review the learnings and share some tips so that you can take something away with you, and we'll be around to take questions. So who we are before we get started.
Hi, I'm Arvind. I usually called Duck. I'm the product manager of GoCD, one of our products at ThoughtWorks. I've been around for just more than 10 years now, helping clients with Agile, CI, CD practices, and everything. I tweet usually from Arvind SV if you need to throw brickbats at me or say something.
And I'm Suzie Prince. I'm the head of product at ThoughtWorks in our product division. I'm also currently the product manager for another continuous integration and delivery product that we have that's called Snap CI. I have a similar level of experience. I've been working in the industry for about 10 years, primarily Agile development, lots of experience doing CI and then CD with our products that we have. And if you want to get hold of me, I'm PM Suzy. So a little bit more about ThoughtWorks. I know some of you are familiar with ThoughtWorks and have been over to the booth, but for those of you who are not, we are a global IT consultancy. We consider ourselves to be a community of passionate software developers. We care a lot about giving back to our industry. A lot of our colleagues were speaking here today over the last few days, and you may have seen the book that we had on our booth was the Continuous Delivery book, built by some of our colleagues a few years ago, and we regularly write books. So we're here today not just as product vendors, but also because we care about doing this stuff right, and we want to share our stories and bring that back to everybody here.
All right. Now that that's out of the way, it makes sense for us to maybe define what CD or what continuous delivery is. So let's do that. This is Jez Humble's latest definition of continuous delivery. It says that continuous delivery is the ability to get all kinds of changes, configuration code, features, bug fixes, infrastructure, everything into the hands of users safely, quickly, and in a reliable manner. Right, in a sustainable way, it says. So that's his definition. In practice, what it comes down to is feedback loops. So you make some check-ins, your CI part of it runs, build and test, everything runs. It gives you some feedback. If that fails, you need to know early. Right, and then if that is okay, then you go on to other kinds of tests, maybe performance tests, security tests, all kinds of tests, and each of this is a feedback loop, and you learn more and more about your commit and your changes as you go through those pipelines, and finally you end up in production. It could be manual, it could be automated, but the idea is to go from test to test, get more and more confidence as you go towards production, so that when you actually deploy into production, you're confident that it's going to work. Right? So that's like a baseline definition of CD for us.
Okay, so now we're going to tell some stories about our journey through CD. The first one that I would like to start with is about our product called Mingle. Mingle is an agile project management tool for software developers and software development teams. And the Mingle story is really a story about how a team went from basically not doing continuous delivery at all to a state where now we consider ourselves pretty much doing continuous delivery. So before I talk about that, I want to just explain that Mingle is an installed product. It's on-premise, but it also has a SaaS offering as well. And that's important for the story that I'm about to tell. So the story really begins back in 2012 before we moved our product to the cloud. It was on-premise software, and we delivered it to our customers. So we had a release to our customers 4 times a year, basically quarterly. So we had a 3-month release cycle. At the end of that release cycle, we packaged everything up and we shipped it out to our customers. The cadence was really set by our business. So as a development team, we sort of followed their lead, and they said quarterly was fine. So quarterly is what we did. But we felt pretty good about our development practices. So we worked with mainline development. So everybody checked into trunk or master mainline multiple times a day, and we built everything using CI in that process. Everything went through quite a comprehensive automated test suite. So we had that, every commit went through that test suite. And we regularly deployed to an environment where we could basically test out the working software ourselves, and all of us could build those installers whenever we wanted to test out the product. And then I guess maybe weekly or monthly, we would deploy to what we called our staging environment. That was for the rest of ThoughtWorks. So anybody who wanted to try a working version of the software could, inside our organization, could try that and could dog food the product and try it out. And although we didn't really release very often, we really felt like if we needed to, we probably could. We felt good about those practices. We felt good about our test suite. We felt, we were pretty satisfied with what we were up to. However, in about 2012, we started to talk about moving our product to the cloud, so offering the SaaS-based product as well as the on-premise product. And I was actually the product manager at that time, and I started to talk about, oh my God, this is going to be amazing. We can deliver daily to our customers. We can do A/B testing. I can turn features on for one customer. I can turn features, different set of features on for another customer and test all this out. And when we started to think about the reality of doing that, developing and delivering daily compared to where we were with this quarterly release cycle, we realized 2 things. How are we going to balance doing the on-premise software and the SaaS product? And also that probably we were not really ready to deliver daily. And in particular, when we started to look at our practices and our processes, we realized that our cycle time, we had a really big area of basically wasted time. We called it the long tail at the end of our release cycle. Some of you may call this hardening, or we hear it called a bunch of other things. And about 25% of that 3-month release cycle was actually taken up by a part of the process we called installer testing. So basically what we were doing is taking our installer and testing it on a combination of different operating systems and browsers to ensure that when we shipped it to our customer, it worked on their hardware. And that process took about 2 or 3 weeks. At the end of every release, we were not ready to ship our software until that was actually done. So it was kind of a problem if we wanted to release regularly. We talked about this being a problem before, but before we were pushed into thinking about doing it regularly, we really hadn't tried to remove this area. So although we'd been frustrated, we really hadn't done anything, but pushed by the impending change that we wanted to do, we reassessed whether we could actually remove that in manual installer testing and actually make it part of our automated process. And that's actually what we did. So we moved from a manual installer testing phase at the end of the process. We automated all of that, most of that testing, and we put it inside our process. So now, whenever we did a build, whenever we committed and we did a build, it actually went through automated testing, to installer testing, to that user release I told you about. And so now you can see we've moved a significant part of the process that was manual at the end to be automated, and it basically, whenever we decided to release, we're in a much better position to do that. And we saw benefits basically right away. So we moved from 25% of our time doing that manual testing to about 5%, so 2 to 3 weeks to about 2 to 3 days, which meant if we wanted to do a bug release, that was a lot simpler. And when we eventually moved to the SaaS world, it was going to be a lot easier for us to do that release. The other thing we found, which we didn't really expect, obviously we expected once we did automation and actually did that testing, we would shrink that down. But one thing that we noticed that I think is important to share with you is that we realized that in our old world, when our QAs had been doing that installer testing, they were basically siloed. They were sitting there doing that testing on their own, and the rest of the team had kind of moved on to the next release. They're talking about the features for the next release. They were ideating. They were talking about how that release was going to work in the real world, and our QAs were left alone to do this testing. And culturally, we would never have said that. We would have said that we were highly collaborative, you know, everybody has an open desk and we all work together. But actually, they were stuck there doing this thing that everybody else had moved on from. And when we removed that from them, we actually were able to have our QAs as part of our ideation sessions. They were able to sort of raise their hand and say, like, have you thought about this test case sooner? So we were really able to like build quality in from the very beginning rather than leaving them to do that testing at the end on their own. And then finally, of course, when we did move to the cloud, which we did about 6 months later, we were actually able to do that pretty, you know, the release process there was actually pretty easy for us. We use the same release process pretty much today. And we're continuing to try and remove those last 2 or 3 days of the installer testing, but we basically use the same process. And I've been running that test suite for about 4 years, the installer testing suite. So the learnings really here are automation. We really didn't think we could automate those installer tests, and we really didn't try to until anybody, you know, forced us to think about whether it was an option. So I would really challenge everybody to look at their own processes, the pieces that are manual, and think about whether they can automate those pieces. The benefits we found in terms of time saving, within the first year, we'd basically saved the time it took us to do that automation. I think it took us about 8 weeks to do the automation, but in the first year we saved that time. And like I said, we've been using that same test suite now for 4 or 5 years, and it's outlived the people who wrote the test suite. And nobody's had to sit through that grueling manual testing again. And it really freed up people. We removed that hidden silo, and it freed up people to do work that people can do that machines can't. Next story.
The next story is a small one about Go, or called GoCD. Just a bit of context, it's a continuous integration, continuous delivery server, which is on-premise. And ThoughtWorks created this about 8 years ago, and it used to be proprietary, but around 2013, end of 2013, 2014, it was taken open source, so it went open source. So this is the story of before and after that. So before going open source, we had a good team. We had people like Jez Humble, who was the first product manager of GoCD, and he is the one who wrote the book. So we were definitely quite comfortable with the concept. You know, we were like, yeah, we know this stuff inside out. But when I look back now and when we look at what we were doing, it's sort of similar to the Mingle story. We had like 3 or 4 month cycles. These were, the product was targeted toward enterprise customers. So you know how enterprise customers never really like to upgrade too often. So there was no real impetus to change that, to make that any quicker. There was a long exploratory and regression kind of cycle, which we were okay with. If it's something is taking you 3 or 4 months, you might as well spend a little bit of time, you know, doing this, and we seem to be okay with that. We had a lot of automated tests. They helped, but I feel that they weren't always the most reliable, let's say. So we always had this question about, can we really do true CD? Can we really deliver an installed product, you know, more often than 2 or 3 months or even a couple of months, right? And yeah, as you probably know, things changed in life, and it happened. In the end of 2013, we decided to go open source. Oh, this was this could be trouble. So we as soon as we did that, we saw that people's expectations completely changed. They They're no longer only enterprise customers, they are these quick-moving open source users because it's free, it's open source now, and they expect their changes in the system yesterday. You know, they want to see their contributions in the system really quickly. So, all right, fine. So we try to release, shorten our release process. So, like, okay, fine. Let's try and reduce it to a month for now, a month and a half. And when we started to do that, we saw that that little regression cycle that we showed earlier actually broke out into many pieces. You know, there was an installer testing phase which had huge gaps. There was performance testing which had huge gaps. So our whole automation had huge gaps that we hadn't really noticed till we needed to release much quicker, right? And this was kind of embarrassing because we were building a CD product, right? So fine, okay. So we're like, okay, fine, we have to do something better. So we started to take some time. We're like, okay, first few releases, let's see what we want to automate. So we automated the publishing of releases. This was something that people had to do manually because it was done every 3 or 4 months. It didn't make sense. So we automated it completely. We built RPM repositories, Debian repositories, everything became automatic. So within a release cycle, a month or a month and a half, we used to do that multiple times, right? This was good, but everything else was being done once at the end. So we went ahead, over a few more releases, we automated the installer tests, right? Similar to the Mingle story that Suzy mentioned, we didn't have that many browser combinations and all that, but we had multiple, like Ubuntu, CentOS, all of these things. So we went ahead and automated that. So that process went ahead. We realized that release notes became a thing, right? You have to do this every month. It gets really boring. So it's like, okay, let's automate that, right? We're telling people to write proper commit messages, and we can automate release notes from that. And it continued. So right now we are sort of in this place where we have automated, we are in the process of automating our performance tests. But the good thing is that our regression cycle that we had, like the regression stage that we had, is just a couple of 2 or 3 day buffer. We can reduce, we can release much quicker now. But if we have all of this automation, why not go ahead and just release all the time, right? This is where I want us to go. Like every commit or every few commits or even a small feature can just go down this pipeline. If you look at it, this is essentially a continuous delivery pipeline. You have automated installer tests, you have automated performance tests, you have release notes, you automatically publish releases, right? So I think a bit of it is that it takes a little bit of confidence in your own automation ability right now to be able to say, yes, this is a release that we can stand by, and if somebody finds some problems in it, we can release a new version if we want, or we can fix it much more easily. So for me, at least, the learnings from this were frequency reduces difficulty. There's a nice Blicky post, a blog post by Martin Fowler called "Frequency Reduces Difficulty." You should probably go read it. It's really nice. It talks about if something is being done again and again over some time, do that more. Right? Bring that pain forward, and you will realize that there are a lot of cost and complexity that you can reduce in that. And automation costs pay for themselves. We've seen this. We used to have these huge cycles, and everybody at the end of it was like, oh, did you actually miss testing this installer? Did you do that? We don't have to worry about that at all. The costs of getting, freeing up our QAs who helped us do all of this automation, the cost of all the devs having to help out sometimes when there was a need, when we needed to put in a bug fix release or something like that, all of those just go away. It's great. So you really should think about it. There is some cost at the beginning, but it pays off, definitely pays off. Our next story is about Snap.
Yes, so this is our final story before we kind of summarize what we think are learnings for you guys. And this is a continuous delivery story that's maybe some of you who've been doing continuous delivery, or you're in your middle of your journey, or you feel like you're expert, might resonate with or might be interesting. So I want to set the scene about the product. So this is a Snap CI, and it's a continuous integration and delivery server for teams who work in the cloud. So if you're using GitHub, we basically take your commit, We know when you commit, we put it through an automated test suite of the tests that you've written, and then we help you deploy it to your cloud targets, so Heroku or AWS, those kind of things. So this is a CD product built by an organization who wrote the book on CD. So to say that our team thought we knew what we were doing is kind of an understatement. We were very enthusiastic. We wanted to basically be the best at continuous delivery and basically, put everything we'd learned in our other experiences. A lot of these people had been doing CD before, and kind of do the best thing that we could. So what would a team that's super enthusiastic and think what they know they're doing do when they want to do this? They basically threw everything CD, all the checklists, all the patterns, everything they'd read before, they were going to do it with this product. I think if there had been a checklist for CD, we would have got 10 out of 10. We did all these things. However, maybe that's not the right thing, and I'll tell you. So about 6 months after the product had started, even before we really had anybody really using it, we were in a state where we had a microservices architecture with 9 different components. We had a sophisticated messaging queue that sent messages between all of these different components. We had the tool to rule everything in terms of monitoring. If you wanted to know any monitoring, we had all the alerts and it was all going off, and it was great. We had an automated infrastructure, which actually is pretty great, actually. And we had deployment pipelines for all of these different components. So, if we were teacher's pet, and we looked at that list of the 10 out of 10, we're doing a great job, right? It was CD Nirvana. Except for it wasn't really. Oops. I want to go back to this definition that Duck walked you through earlier, and the 2 key parts of it for me are all the changes. So every change into the hands of your users, people using your software, quickly, safely, and sustainably. We were not really delivering that quickly. We were delivering to production every 2 weeks, which actually, it's pretty good. The other story was 3 months. We were delivering every 2 weeks. However, this was not a business decision. This was not someone saying, I'm cool with the 2-week delivery release cycle. This is because we were unable to deploy any sooner than that, partly because those 9 different components were actually not separate components, and it actually took us that long to make all of the right changes to get something out to production. So my predecessor, who was a product manager at the time, was exceptionally frustrated that he was not able to do this daily continuous deployment thing that we had been striving for. The second thing is that when we did deliver, actually the likelihood of key features working was, he says it was only about 50%. So 50% of the time, he'd wait 2 weeks, put something into prod, and it would not work as he expected it to. And actually the monitoring that they had in place, that was telling them lots of stuff, but so much stuff they couldn't work out, really didn't tell them when things were broken. So they actually relied on usability testing or the few test users that they had to tell them when things were not working out. So they obviously weren't doing CD, even though they had this checklist of things that they'd heard about at conferences or they'd done before that was great. In terms of the definition, they really were not doing it, and they were not doing what he wanted to do as the business owner for that product. And it was kind of affecting his ability to move to the next stage of the product, which was for everybody to use it. So we basically had to reassess a bunch of stuff, and we actually reassessed this whole list. So we did a whole talk on this. I would talk you through all of these different things that we changed, but the one I want to talk about today, to keep the story shorter, is to talk about microservices. And the reason I want to talk about it is there's a lot of people talking about microservices. Interestingly, I think the track is today. I didn't know that when we set this up, but a lot of people are talking about how microservices are essential for you to be able to do continuous delivery, or that they're a best practice, or that they're something that you should strive for. And I definitely believe that they are, but in our situation, they were not right for us at that time. And the reason they weren't right is basically we had preemptively selected those 9 different components. We were 6 months into our project and we had 9 different parts. And there was no real rhyme or reason why we had separated those pieces out. And because of that, although they were separate, they were actually basically coupled to each other. So one example would be, I mentioned RabbitMQ to you before, which is basically a sophisticated messaging queue. And we were using that, and it was sending messages between these separate components. But one aspect that meant that they were coupled is the data structure that we'd actually set up. Meant that when we changed one component, we actually were required to change the data structure in the other components. And so we were actually found ourselves in a place where we were actually unable to deliver those pieces separately from each other. And we hadn't really thought through what the meaning of these separate components was. So even though we had this kind of quite a bit of cognitive overload to remember all of these different pieces and what they all did and what their repos were and remind everybody, and they all had like crazy names like Noki and Shivero and all these cool names, we still didn't get the benefit of separating them because we basically had to deliver a bunch of them all at the same time anyway. So we took what may be seen as a kind of backward step, and we put them all back together again, and we came back to a monolith. And when we came back to that monolith, we were actually in a better place to understand what was going on with the product. So we actually were able to gradually release more often, and we were actually able to allow the business needs and the needs of the product to tell us where those splits should be. So I think it originally started in about 2013. They put it all back together in 2014, and now in 2016 we are back. We're back out there again. We do have a microservices architecture, but this time it's significantly better. The pieces that need to be together are together. We know where to find them. And the pieces that shouldn't be together are not together. And we are now able to release some pieces independently of other pieces and achieve that continuous delivery that we wanted to. So the learnings really on this one, it's not really a microservices fail story, although it could be. Maybe we'll write that talk next time. I think the thing that I really want to emphasize with this particular story is that CD's cool, right? That's what our products do, and we want everybody to be doing that. But it's not, doing continuous delivery is not my job. Like, delivering useful, valuable software. Oops. Well, I don't know where it went. Oh. Delivering valuable, useful software into the hands of users. That's what I want us all to be doing. I don't want us all to be saying like, oh, cool, I do CD now. I used to do CI, now I do CD, and I followed this checklist, and it's all great. Because I want everybody to think about why we're trying to do that. And in our case, we went for all the cool things. We went for the hot things. We wanted to be the best. And we forgot about doing the thing that's really important. And the second thing is that CD's a journey. Like, you don't just land there. You don't just decide to do it. You don't just pick a tool that's going to help you. You don't just follow a practice that someone like me or him told you to do at a conference. It's really an evolution, and you need to sort of set your goals about what it is that you want to achieve and make your way there. So don't pick microservices in the first few weeks unless you know that's what you want. Don't pick the best monitoring tool if you don't know what to do when the alerts come in. Do the first thing, evolve, and move forward on your journey. So we're going to move to the takeaways now.
All right, so Did it switch? Okay. So that's it for our story. So this is like a summary of all the things that we've been talking about. The first one is practicing continuous integration. We didn't talk about this specifically because we're like, oh, this is a given. But I'm always very surprised when I come to these conferences and see that there are still people who are not doing CI, and some even not practicing, version controlling their code and their infrastructure, all of these things. So it's a given that if you're trying to go down a CD journey, you need to have your CI in place, which means that you have automated tests, and that actually fail, not just having tests, right? If you aren't doing that, please do that before you go down this journey. Right? That's the first one. The second one is something that I alluded to in the Go story as well. It showed up in the Mingle story. Frequency really does reduce difficulty. If there is something that you feel is painful, the only way that I know of to make that less painful is to keep doing it again and again, get completely bugged with it, completely bored and irritated with it, so that you will automate it. That is the only way that I know of to reduce that. Putting more people on it is not going to help. So you can see from our stories how that showed up, but I'm pretty sure if it is something that's happening to you, and it probably is in any kind of big scale, try and bring that forward, try and bring that pain forward, make everyone aware of it, and do that more often.
I just talked about this one because it's the one from the last story, but I think I can't reiterate this enough. Perhaps it's because I'm a product manager and I want great software with users first, but do the right thing by your users. Don't just follow the checklist. Don't just be a me too person. Think about what it is that you're trying to achieve. And we're more than happy. We're probably gonna finish a bit early, so we're happy to take questions. But I can talk more about this, or we can talk more about what might be appropriate for individuals. But think about where it is you're trying to go before you just start to do something. And then involve the whole team. So I mentioned it in the Mingle story about the QAs, but I think the other thing that I want to emphasize is I, as a product manager, continuous delivery is really important to me. And it's not just a practice for your development team, it's a practice for your whole business to understand. You need to encourage your business to understand the benefits of doing it, encouraging them to take risks on spending some time to do some automation. So it's kind of okay for us to stand there and say and we stopped and we did this automation and it took 8 weeks. It actually wasn't as simple as that. Somebody had to stand around and convince somebody that was the right thing to do. So this isn't just a development practice, it's kind of a cultural practice as well. It's going to require change in your organization. It's going to require change for your individual teams. So involve everybody, and the more you involve everybody, the easier it becomes to make those choices and think through decisions, and have everybody understand what's going on. And then the final one.
I wish we had a different word for automate. But I always hear people say, oh, we have all of these things automated, but these things cannot be automated. They talk about CSS, UI, all kinds of things. If you think that there is something that cannot be automated, it probably can. You probably need to think about it in a different way, or maybe different tools, or maybe blaze your path and write your own. Of course, do your own cost-benefit analysis and all that, but most people are reluctant to even go down that path because they feel that it will not work, or it is just going to be too costly. If you're in it for the slightly longer haul, medium to long haul, it probably will pay off. If you have any concerns about, there is this thing and we don't think we should be automating it, come talk to us. We can have a discussion about it. At ThoughtWorks, we really work on a bunch of automated things. So yeah, we're always interested in talking about what's not working and where we can help. So yeah.
All right, so that's it. We are not going to read this slide to you. We have lots of parting thoughts, actually. We edited this a bunch of times, but this is just something for everybody to think about, and we're ready to take questions if you want to shout them out, or we'll hang around for a while. We really do care a lot about doing this stuff, so happy to help. Yes, please.
First product, Mingle.
Yes.
What took 2 to 3 weeks to test manually? What was the thing that took the most of it?
It was basically a lot of repeated tasks. So we had this installer, and we delivered it out to our customers. But they might have been running it on a Windows box, or they might have been running it on a Unix box, and their end users might have been using. Actually, I think it was still like Internet Explorer 6 or 7 or Chrome or all of these things. So we basically would take it, put it on the hardware, and test it like in all these different versions of the browser. And then we had 4 QAs. And I used to have a slide in here before we took it out, but basically they had a spreadsheet, and they'd be like, this browser combination and this operating system. And they would do it all by hand. And they really felt that it required a person to do that, until we talked about how much time it was taking them, and it really didn't take a person. So now we have a test suite that does it, and that is so much better. Yep, please.
Do you have any issues with testing the UI?
I might not be the best person. Did you hear the question?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they are UI heavy. They're pretty UI heavy. I think Duck probably has a better perspective from Go. I don't know if you do.
Yeah, we have a test suite with about 300 different tests, which are all going through the UI. These are full functional tests, end-to-end functional tests. They bring up the agents and bring up the server, and they do all kinds of things. Couple of things that I've learned is that if you have flaky tests, then you are going to have problems. Right? It's much better to not have a test than to have a flaky test, because if people see that it's failing randomly, and if they rerun it and it passes, people lose all faith in that, right? They just before releasing, they will make sure that it's green, and they'll be like, this is good, right? So I would advocate for removing tests, right, in that scenario. The second one is that a mistake that we have made is that we develop with agile and iterations and stories and all of this, right? So we used to be in a stage where every time we delivered a story, we would have a functional test to go with that, and this is a full UI end-to-end test, right? And this became unmanageable very, very quickly. Along with it being flaky, it would take a lot of time, right? And that is another recipe for disaster. You don't want to tie your stories to a functional test. You want to tie your functional test to a whole journey. Right? You want to ancillarily test some things, maybe a happy path, but you don't want to try and get all kinds of sad path or unhappy paths in your scenarios as functional tests. You want to catch them much earlier in the process using integration tests, using UI-based integration tests. They tend to be much more, let's say, much more reliable than a functional test, which brings up everything together. Right, they were Sahi based. I don't know if you know Sahi. It's another one of those Selenium Sahi WebDriver. They're all in the same space. So those functional tests are all Sahi tests right now, but they are all managed by Gauge, one of our other products, which is a test, BDD style test management, like a testing product, let's say. So that works well, but it comes down to not to Sahi or Selenium or WebDriver. It comes down to how you have written those tests and how reliable they are. We are actually moving to WebDriver for most of those things. We feel that the speed and the kind of Chrome versions that it works with is better for us. But you need to think about things like Jasmine tests and ERB tests and so on earlier. Right.
Because we do have the acceptance test that just test the backend. The UI, they still want to do it manually because it's how we don't trust these Serene. They sometimes they're fake.
Yeah.
Before that, different ones they grow flakies. So we don't really have a solution for the
Mm-hmm. You're saying about convincing them? Uh huh. Did you want to say something?
I was just going to talk about Gauge. It does do, it actually will run your front end tests. You have to have, we run ours with Selenium, right, on the front end. And actually, I'm one of those people who want to see it in our organization, and we have it run, and I can actually see the tests running and the browser coming up and the cursor moving to the appropriate parts. So we actually do achieve that using Selenium to run through the browser tests. And as a business person, it is pretty reassuring to actually see that. So I kind of understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, I think it comes down to trust. I have had interactions with product managers who have needed to see that, and they wouldn't let it go. But I think that once they start seeing value in going into the process, and when you can show them that, if there was a bug that would have been caught here. At least I've had experience doing this with QAs where they have been reluctant. They have been like, we need functional tests. I want to see things move, right? I want to see things actually happen. We've been able to sit them down, tell them about, okay, these are these tests. If you can prove to me that it's not going to be tested here, then we'll write a functional test for it. And they haven't been able to. It's like, they're like, okay, these bugs are actually caught. So I felt that including people in that process and kind of getting them on board helps. But if you cannot, then yeah, you cannot. Some people cannot be convinced.
Yeah, please.
So from a non-UI perspective, so if you're just delivering a service, my organization, we always have continuous integration, right? When you're about to commit to master, it runs through a whole suite of tests, and then if it passes, then it merges into master. And my question is, what kind of differences do you have between the test suite, between integration and the test suite that you have before you do deployments? Because you guys had the testing in both places. Is it just running the same set of tests, or what's different between those?
Usually no. Usually we wouldn't run the same set of tests again and again. You can disagree with me, but yeah, we would start with, usually what I try to do when we talk about a value stream, essentially, right, from commit all the way to production and what is in between, we try and put the fastest tests ahead so that they give you the quickest feedback. So those are usually the unit tests. We have thousands of them, right? And they make, once they pass, we are reasonably sure that we haven't broken some random old functionality somewhere, right? Next come the integration tests. These are tests which bring up maybe a part of the database, not the whole system essentially, but they have file system tests. They might actually write to the file system, read that, do some things like that. Slightly slower, but they bring in another level of confidence, right?
Do you run those before integration or before deployment?
The integration tests, by definition, they will be integrated. It's not like an integrated. It's not the full product that you're testing. This would be before that. This is still at the code level, right? And then you bring in the functional tests. These are the ones where you have all the components. These are real systems, and you bring them up, and then you test them. This is the point where you have a whole system, right? We also have other tests around performance, security. There are different levels that you could do, and each of these, the idea is for them to give you more and more confidence, at certain points. Some of these we do in parallel. We do installer tests in parallel with some of these things, for instance, right? So all of that comes down to how many agents you have to build parallelly, all of those things. Ideally, you want to make a commit, all of these things run, everything goes green, and you're okay, and you deploy, right? What order they happen in is more a consequence of how much hardware you have to build them all parallelly. Which feedback do you want first, and which would you want to not slow down, and so on. I think you had a question. We can get it.
I think it was one of the first products that you guys talked about, the one that was packaged software, Mingle maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have to do any kind of upgrade testing because it's an installed product? That's one of two questions, one of two.
Okay, I'll answer it so that I don't forget it. Yeah, so the 2 or 3 days that I talked about that we still have, we do still do some of that manually, not all of it. So we do have to do upgrade testing for sure. We do some of it automated, so we'll it's a little complicated because now we are deploying the SaaS software every day, and we don't do any upgrade testing for that because we're basically upgrading prod. We do some upgrade testing on an environment before we go to production. We do some upgrade testing for the installed product because there's been still about 3 months between one version and the next version. We do some of it manually, but some of it we do automated as well. It depends the nature of the change. Yeah, it depends. Yeah, how really the complicated piece comes with the database. How many changes we've made to the database, and whether our QAs have confidence. I guess it's the same sort of thing. Like how confident we feel about our automated tests, and whether we just want to do a little bit of checking to make sure everything's okay.
And just a follow-up question to that is when you move to such more frequent release cycles, I mean, before you used to release 3 times a year or 4 times a year,
Mm-hmm.
and you only have to test, let's say, 4 upgrade paths, because you only have 4 versions, however many back you support. When you have releases every week, did that in some way affect your upgrade testing? Because now the matrix that you have
Is so bigger. Yeah.
upgrade from 2 versions back to current version, now you have 20 versions in between.
Yeah, so this might be a better question for because with Mingle, which is the first product, we still kept that 3-month cycle for the install testing for the installed product. We did sometimes go sooner than that, but we didn't drastically increase the number of combinations. We were just able to deliver if we needed to sooner, but the business didn't change there. And partly because our customers, getting them to upgrade every 3 months was kind of too much for them anyway. But I think with Go, maybe you have that problem. Yeah.
Yeah. So with Go, it's open source, which means that people can be at any random version of CentOS or Ubuntu or something. Yeah. Our test metrics for that has increased, but we pick the LTE versions. We pick some things, right? You cannot always be like, oh, bleeding edge of Ubuntu and like, all like 100 bleeding edge divisions before that, right? So we had to pick and choose, and we said, okay, these are the ones that we're going to test with. If something happens there, for example, a big systemd kind of change, right? Like we're like, okay, we will have to pick that and do special, like, put that into the whole matrix, right? So yeah, it is not straightforward, and it's not like we have infinite hardware to do that. Yep. Sorry, we'll get to you. Maybe you, because you asked questions before, and then we'll get you. Sorry about that. Go ahead. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Then, okay, cool.
If you had to deal with, back on the previous question, on the size of the test, like sheer number. So once you hit like tens of thousands of tests, which would be good, it's taking a while. So the acceptance test now, unit testing, which the acceptance test that you do database, that kind of stuff. So did you do anything about that? Like, because we don't get a full batch for overnight.
Right. Yeah. I guess Mingle has struggled with that a little bit more, but with Go, yeah, we have actually culled tests. We've been like, okay, these two are testing more or less the same thing. They were from that era when we were testing like a whole scenario for every story. This doesn't make sense anymore. It's not giving us quick feedback, which means that it is not giving us feedback. There are opportunities for you to like delay that. We have this set of priority tests which run and which we think, but people are tied to those older tests and they don't want to get rid of them. But I think the right idea is to relook them and figure out whether there are duplicates, whether you can add some of it into another test. And if they're very, very valid business cases, then you have to treat it as I don't have enough hardware to test this parallelly kind of problem. We've faced that as well. We're like, okay, this is taking too long. We don't want to remove these, which means that we are going to bring in more hardware and this is going to be split and we'll run them all parallelly.
And in the continuous process, when do you run the acceptance tests? Each commit or
Yeah, each commit.
The big ones.
Big ones, each commit. If they ran parallelly, I think Mingle's story is much better. But if they ran serially, they would take hours and hours, But we split them up and we run them all parallelly, and they take something like 35 to 40 minutes, which is still not something we're happy with, but they do. Yeah. We can talk about it more if you like. I think so.
Yeah, I would say like your question is perfectly valid in the case of Mingle. We have like a lot of tests. It's time to stop. But yeah, I can talk to you more about it. We actually have written a bunch of blog posts about how we try to reduce that time because it's painful. Yeah. Thanks. Thank you.